Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first random review of the season, and thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah Goldenberg, and Connie Georgiou and I coordinate this program for the Friends of the Library, which sponsors these events. Connie, could you join me on the screen and greet our audience?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here.
And our library host today is Mike Hansen, and he'll be fielding the questions at the end of the program. Mike, could you turn on your camera and say hello?
Hello, thank you for joining us.
A few operational details. If you're having any problems with GoToWebinar, please use the question or chat box on your control panel and we'll try to help you. We're recording the presentation, so if your issues can't be resolved, you'll find a link to the recording in your follow-up letter and you'll still be able to see the talk. Also, there will be a link to a more polished version on the random review page on the library website soon. We're planning to continue to have virtual events until we feel it's safe to meet in person again at the library. Also on the Random Review webpage, you'll find a link to a list of library books related to today's topic, created by our volunteer Gail Gerdeman. And on the same page, you can sign up to receive monthly Random Review email announcements. We encourage you to submit questions for our speaker at any time during the presentation by typing them into the question or chat box, and she'll answer as many as we have time for at the end of the program. Coming up later in the month, the Friends of the Library will be holding its first book sale in over a year and a half, and we're very excited about being able to do this. It will be held the same weekend as the Corvallis Fall Festival and will take place in the main meeting room. We hope to see you there, and don't forget your mask. If you're at the library, there'll be some bookmarks there with information about the fall sale. In your GoToWebinar control panel, you can find a handout of the poster for the sale with the dates and times on it. And next time you're at the library, be sure to pick up one of our Random Review bookmarks there with the schedule on it so you can see what's coming up. I'd like to thank our community sponsors of this program, Grassroots Books and Music, Northwest Graphic Imaging, the Corvallis Gazette-Times, and reporter Jim Day. And a big thank you to the Best Library, and especially librarians Mike Hansen and Bonnie Brzezowski, who have provided indispensable support to us in the presentation of our virtual programs. Next month's review will be on October 13th, when Bob Beshta will discuss the book Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter by Ben Goldfarb. A very apropos book for those of us living in Beaver Country. Now I'd like to invite Carol Mason, a member of the Random Review Selection Committee and a reviewer herself, to introduce today's speaker. I'll say goodbye until the end and enjoy.
Thank you, Deborah, and welcome everyone. Our reviewer for today's book is Dr. Allison Davis Whiteeyes, Director of Community Diversity Relations at Oregon State. Before coming to the Office of Institutional Diversity, Dr. Davis Whiteeyes served as Assistant Vice Provost of Student Affairs and Director of Diversity and Cultural Engagement. Her career has focused on several areas, including strategic organizational change, community building, academic and international partnerships, tribal engagement, and graduate and undergraduate student development. Under her leadership at OSU, student diversity efforts were reorganized and expanded to include our 7 cultural resource centers, as well as intersectional and multimodal student learning and engagement programming. In 2016, she was the recipient of the President's Oregon State University Beaver Champion Award for her commitment to advancing the work of Oregon State University across the state and beyond. Dr. Davis Whiteeyes earned her bachelor's and Master of Arts degrees at UCLA and her PhD at OSU in adult higher education with an emphasis on international education. When I asked Allison about her interests in books, she said as she was growing up, Pearl Buck's The Good Earth and Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey were favorites. She also mentioned Native American author James Welch, who wrote Winter in the Blood, and Ivan Doig's This House of Sky. Influential academic authors include Paul Gilroy, known for his books The Black Atlantic and Against Race. She's currently reading an English translation of Sebastian Brant's The Ship of Fools, which was published in German verse in 1494, and which she describes as a delightful, witty read on the various failings that mark humanity, which she feels relevant today. Allison grew up as the oldest of 3 children, and she has one son who is an assistant professor in Native American Studies at Southern Oregon University. She's a caregiver for her 92-year-old mother, whom Allison describes as a font of wisdom, knowledge, and love. Among Allison's many talents, she also plays classical piano with Bach, Chopin, and Buxtehude, her favorite composers. Now, please join me in welcoming Allison Davis Whiteice to our random review of this month's book, Cast, by Isabel Wilkerson.
Thank you so very much, Carol, for that warm and generous introduction. I am very pleased to share my review of Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents, a recent National Book Foundation Award winner in 2020 for nonfiction. Next slide. Next slide. The author, Isabel Wilkerson, is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize and the National Humanities Medal for her New York Times bestseller, The Warmth of Other Suns. She has taught at Princeton, Emory, and Boston universities, and has lectured at more than 200 other colleges and universities across the US, Europe, and Asia. As an affiliate faculty member at Oregon State University, this book resonates with me personally because it touches on the intersections of human oppression through a global lens. This book is a must-read for anyone who is interested in examining the current social structure of America and the world that casts some members of our societies as less than human. Understanding the structure of this system and working actively to emancipate all of humanity from the confines of its own machinations is the true goal of this book. Next slide. Wilkerson's book Cast begins with a question of critical self-reflection. What would we do if faced with a totalitarian or authoritarian culture that denies the humanity of others, that perpetuates legal and physical violence against members of its own society? Each of us, I am sure, would like to think that we would be on the right side of history, the moral side, the side that would stand up and speak out against inhuman acts, be they physical, legal, cultural, societal. But would we? Next slide. Wilkerson opens by cogently stating the following. In a totalitarian regime, such as that of the Third Reich, it was an act of bravery to stand firm against an ocean. We all want to believe that we would have been this individual. We might feel certain that were we Aryan citizens under the Third Reich, we surely would have seen through it, would have risen above it like this individual, been that person resisting authoritarianism and brutality in the face of mass hysteria. We would like to believe that we would have taken the more difficult path of standing up against injustice in defense of the outcast. But unless people are willing to transcend their fears, endure discomfort and derision, suffer the scorn of loved ones and neighbors and co-workers and friends, fall into disfavor of perhaps everyone they know, face exclusion and even banishment, it would be numerically impossible for everyone to be that man. What would it take to be him in any era? What would it take to be him now? Next slide. Wilkerson's book Cast provides for us a comparative analysis of how societies actually create regimes of humanity that assign value to human lives. She provides a comparative analysis of the caste system in India that produced the untouchables, otherwise known as Dalits, within the caste system of the United States and Nazi Germany, which used a racialized formula to create its own caste of untouchables within its own borders. A caste system, she writes, is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and other immutable traits. It is here that her book is truly remarkable in making these connections between three continents, Asia, Europe, and North America. Next slide. American history sets a unique stage for Wilkerson as she explores the peculiar institution of the American caste system. Rooted in the colonial era of Virginia in 1619, where phenotypical differences were highlighted as markers for the marked and the unmarked. The marked being Black and Indigenous peoples, while the unmarked referred to the white colonists. Here, the construction of the idea of whiteness and Blackness begins to serve as that eternal flame which leads our country into a devastating civil war and a failed Reconstruction policy that not only creates an untouchable caste, that of Black Americans, but also creates in Southern white communities a seething resentment that we see present in today's politics and in today's discourse around difference. This precarious position of subordinate caste was quickly determined early during colonial rule in this country as a way not only to subdue other populations, but to also create an endurable system based on phenotype that allows privilege for some and a permanent underclass for others, an inherited bondage that, quite frankly, continues to this day. Next slide. Some of these roots of what we see in the US actually began earlier, and colonialism really is the father, if you will, of the caste system that we see so prevalent in North, Central, and South America. Colonialism, even under Spanish rule, referred to these racial hierarchies as castas, as evidenced here in this painting, that clearly outline the different castes that are created when intermarriage occurs and produces children and new family structures. These hybrid bodies are like containers. The label on the container signals to the world what is presumed to be inside and what is to be done with it. Next slide. Wilkerson then takes this view of castas, or castes, and does a comparative analysis with India. Her impetus actually for writing this book begins with her trip to India, where she meets with Dalit or untouchable leaders. These untouchables or Dalits in India, who are the lowest caste of humans in that society, were motivated and inspired by the civil rights movement in the United States, and in particular by the civil rights philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Wilkerson's book explores in depth the movement in India for the rights of the untouchable class. She notes that during her visits to India, it was this class of individuals who continued to bravely advocate for their human rights in a country that still holds on to caste as a strong signifier of human worth and value. Dalit, in their native language, also means the broken ones. And it is with this lens that Wilkerson asks the existential question that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked when he traveled to India only to be classified as an untouchable upon his arrival to a different continent. The existential question is, how does humanity move beyond the violence of dehumanization? Next slide. The take on caste in the Americas is both the same as the Dalit example in its inheritability. In other words, this caste is inherited and passed down from generation to generation. People cannot move out of this caste. And simultaneously, it is decidedly different from the Dalit experience by its sole emphasis on race. The use of biological racial hygiene measures codified into law first occurred in the US, as evidenced in these three examples. To the left, you will see a photo of small children. These are the white slaves of New Orleans. In other words, these are children who are considered colored or Black because of the one drop of African heritage that they possess. The infamous one drop rule that determined who was white and who was not. This emphasis on blood and measurement became an American hallmark, a uniquely American innovation. You also see in the center of this slide the Virginia racial hygiene laws. These laws, similar to many of the anti-miscegenation laws throughout the United States that disallowed intermarriage between various racial groups, were prevalent throughout many states in this country. As a matter of fact, here in Oregon, such laws also existed, and all people who were 1/4 Negro, Chinese, Kanaka, which means Native Hawaiian, American Indian, were considered either non-white, colored, Black, or mulatto, and were not allowed to intermarry with anyone outside of these castes. In addition, you will note that blood degree is critical in determining citizenship within contemporary American Indian tribal nations. These algorithms for determining the caste, standing, and even citizenship of some individuals served as a proof of concept to another continent. The American system of racial castes is an inherited, fixed, and rigid structure. The definition of who is white may change, but the privilege associated with whiteness does not change. Next slide. As part of her comparative analysis, Wilkerson moves to Nazi Germany, where she explores the use of race as caste and the dehumanization of the German Jewish community. Her book uncovers for the reader the logic, or rather the illogic, of the German racial system that was codified into law, referred to as the Nuremberg Laws, to identify who is of mixed race Jewish ancestry or German. Informed by the racial hygiene laws and system of the United States, Germany instituted the Nuremberg Laws, codified them into law, and enforced this racialized Jewishness. And not only that, quantified that racialized Jewishness by blood to create a caste of untouchables and undesirables within German society. In crafting the Nuremberg Laws, Nazi officials felt the American one-drop rule was just too strenuous a standard to maintain and opted for their own algorithm. In effect, the Nazis felt their algorithm was more scientific and to some extent, perhaps more even-handed in determining the racial hygiene of the German demos. Regardless, the use of these algorithms determined not only the value of a human being, but also in many cases, whether they lived or died. Next slide. Wilkerson then goes into a deep dive about the necessary systems to uphold caste, and I think this is where her work really shines. She actually brings forth some of her own concepts about what it is that creates caste and why it is so important for each of us to understand how these, as she refers to them, 8 pillars manifest themselves and create processes and systems of thought and thinking. She has these 8 listed, and she starts with divine laws and nature, referencing the curse of Ham, also referencing the Hindu text Manu, which created the Brahmin class and delineates them as the privileged versus the Dalits, the untouchables. And then she takes a nod to the Aryan and Nordic superiority myth. In all of these divine laws and laws of nature allow the oppressor to feel they are blessed by divine right. And it is this acknowledgement, this understanding of having divine law behind oneself that perpetuates these systems of inequity. Heritability is the second pillar, the immutable fact that caste is intergenerational and is passed on from generation to generation. The third pillar, endogamy and marriage control. We see this evidenced not only by anti-miscegenation laws in the United States and in Germany, but we also see it enforced in India, where the Dalit class is never allowed to move out, to marry out, or to work out of their subordinate role. Number 4, purity versus pollution. The distancing of the untouchable, whether it's physically, legally, or psychologically. An example that Wilkerson shares is that of the Dalits in India, where their shadow must not even come in contact or touch a Brahmin. That the Dalits are forced to erase their footprints, should they leave any in the sand, in effect erasing their very existence. This notion of distancing oneself between pollution. We see this time and time again through the examples that Wilkerson shares, even in the United States, of the idea of one African-American toe touching a segregated swimming pool, relies on the fact that people will now drain the pool, scrub it clean, and refill it with new water because it has been polluted by the touch of one African-American. This is the dichotomy between purity versus pollution. And Wilkerson ties this together into how all of this systemically comes together into an authoritarian regime like Nazi Germany. Occupational hierarchy is another pillar, reserving the subordinate for the most undesirable roles, demeaning positions, the role that only an untouchable would take. And of course, all of this is tied together in the 6th pillar of dehumanization and stigma. All of these come together to bring about the dehumanization of the subject and attach stigma to them. It is enforced through terror, the 7th pillar, by exemplifying and allowing for public displays of sadism to be played out on these bodies. And last, it enforces and reinforces the inherent superiority versus the inherent inferiority of the other. She asks a very poignant question, and one that has troubled humanity for millennium. Why do we need scapegoats? Wilkerson's book answers that question with a very cogent response, saying that, quite frankly, the victims themselves play the unwitting role of diverting society's attention from its structural ills to lay blame on the victim. That is the role that the untouchable, that the subordinate, that the inferior individual plays in the caste system. Wilkerson argues here that without the untouchable, without this lower caste, society collapses. The untouchable is actually needed. That is what Wilkerson states in her arguments. Next slide. Through her analysis of these 8 pillars, Wilkerson also discusses how caste manifests itself physically, psychologically, and socially among groups of individuals. Some of her more interesting observations are the following. She talks about the fascinating phenomenon called Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological disorder that often happens to abused, hostage victims, in which the victim develops a positive sense of feeling towards the person holding them captive or the abuser. Stockholm Syndrome manifests itself in the ways that subordinate people, untouchables, Dalits, begin to develop negative feelings towards anyone who might be trying to liberate them from their subordinate and abused position. The second thing that Wilkerson calls out as a theme is lateral oppression. This is an interesting psychological disorder in which oppressed victims take their inner rage towards the oppressor and manifest that oppressive and harmful behaviors and actions towards individuals within their own caste or class. This is a manifestation that happens over a prolonged period of time and creates dissension within the lower classes or castes themselves. The third item that she calls out, or the third theme that she calls out, is a caste system among white Americans. This was actually perhaps one of the more interesting perceptions that Wilkerson raises, because it's one that is not talked about, if at all, in American society. And so in here, she speaks about the unspoken hierarchy of whiteness, even among white Americans, in which Nordic individuals, or those who claim to have Nordic ancestry, have a privilege or a higher rank, if you will, from people who have European or white heritage from other parts of Europe, say Eastern Europe, or in historical times, Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants. This caste system among white Americans is very fascinating to Wilkerson, because she counts it as sort of an intra-ethnic conflict that occurs but is rarely spoken about, because it is hidden under the blanket of white privilege or whiteness. But there also is a spectrum, if you will, or a hierarchy, if you will. She also talks about the health effects of having such hierarchies, and states that there are empirical studies that show the deleterious effects of racism on even telomere length in the cells of human beings that contributes to their short lives, if you will, or shortened life expectancies. We already know many of the factors that contribute to high blood pressure and mental illness issues, and we do have data that shows that all of these societal and external pressures do create increased health disparities. Today, we're seeing it play itself out as we work through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we see the health disparities play themselves out in the numbers of individuals who are affected by the disease, go into hospitalization, and who survives the disease or succumbs, one way or the other. And then the last theme she touches on is the powerful and persistent use of symbols to create emotional appeal and unity against a specific caste, a sort of in-group, out-group psychology. As Wilkerson kind of touches on all of these manifestations, one of the things that is perhaps most interesting is what happens to individuals who come from Europe to the United States, say recent immigrants, and recent immigrants from Africa. We sometimes assume that the American narrative around caste, which again is highly racialized, is one that's understood across the world, but that is not necessarily so. And Wilkerson calls that out in this book, which then begs the question, how complex are people's understanding of difference? European immigrants to the United States are immediately confronted with the label of whiteness as a privilege and as a specific high-ranking caste, and have to figure out within even the caste of white Europeans that are currently here where they fit on that scale. Africans who come to the United States have a very different view of Blackness and don't necessarily see, in many instances, their alignment with the struggles of Black Americans here. They do not see themselves necessarily as part of that lower caste. However, upon arrival in the United States and being confronted with this sort of racialized caste system, they begin to develop a sense of awareness of, the American caste system is indeed based on phenotype, and therefore they begin to develop a very different sense and understanding of that caste system. So while it is interesting that Wilkerson does this comparative analysis between the Dalits in India, what happened in Nazi Germany, and then the uniqueness of the American situation, you begin to see that at the end of the day, it is about how we oppress groups and how we define that oppression within the various groups that becomes manifest in itself through law, through how we treat each other, and how we perpetuate these systems in all manner of different kinds of ways. So all of this leads us back to this next slide. Next slide, please. What would it take to be this man in any era? What would it take to be him now? I believe that the author of this book provides us some unique insights. And she does this by forwarding forth not only a vision of what happened in Nazi Germany, but she's also sending all of us a warning about what could happen. Wilkerson states, Germany bears witness to an uncomfortable truth, that evil is not one person, but can be easily activated in more people than we would like to believe when the right conditions congeal. It is easy to say, if we could just root out the despots before they take power or intercept their rise. If we could just wait until the bigots die away. It is much harder, however, to look into the darkness in the hearts of ordinary people with unquiet minds, needing someone to feel better than, whose cheers and votes allow despots anywhere in the world to rise to power in the first place. It is harder to focus on the danger of common will, the weaknesses of the human immune system, the ease with which the toxins can infect succeeding generations, because it actually means the enemy. The threat is not just one man. It is us, all of us, lurking in humanity itself. Next slide. So, Quo Vadis, America? Wilkerson's book does not really offer up a neatly wrapped response to this question. Instead, she allows us, the readers, to consider what is at stake and where we are in the current political atmosphere. She highlights, in particular, the 2016 election as a sort of great awakening of a long simmering resentment that has grown in this country since the Reconstruction era over perceived changes in the caste system. This system is over 400 years old and will not be dismantled by a single law or any one person, no matter how powerful. A caste system persists because we, each and every one of us, Wilkerson insists, allows it to exist in large and small ways, in our everyday actions, and how we elevate or demean, embrace or exclude on the basis of the meaning attached to people's physical traits. So again, I'm going to ask this question, where do we go from here? Perhaps after reading the book, one might come to the conclusion that, maybe we need something akin to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, an opportunity to hear one another out and confront our deepest held fears through courageous truth-telling. Perhaps we need to be able to sit in the discomfort of hearing where we have fallen short of our American ideals that honor all human beings and the sanctity of human life. Perhaps we need to atone and find healing not outside ourselves, but quite frankly within ourselves and within one another. Through Wilkerson's writing, we find that our prejudices are indeed systemic, yet our awakening can only be individual. It is perhaps this simplistic belief in our humanity that may be the most subversive act of resistance, our ability to hear the truth, reconcile difference, and work towards a collective healing. This may be, in fact, the only way we lead all humanity to a true emancipation, an emancipation of the soul beyond the confines of man-made castes would, in actuality, set everyone free. I really ask all of you, the audience, who have taken the time to hear this review, to really consider reading Isabel Wilkerson's book. The book is not necessarily an easy read, but it is certainly one worth reading to understand why the United States, and quite frankly, the world, is where it is today. I would also offer up and say that what you read in Caste, although she is referring to the American situation and making a comparative analysis, it really is an analysis of the world stage as we see it today. She mentions the Dalits, the situation there, and their rise and their hope for the recognition of their human rights. Civil rights are human rights. People sometimes forget that. She also, in her comparison with Nazi Germany, reminds us, warns us that this could happen again, and it could happen anywhere, not just in Germany, but in any country and in any society in the world where authoritarianism rises and seeks, as she cogently states throughout her book, to find a scapegoat, to find a release valve. There has to be a release valve. So she warns us to be careful, to pay attention, to be mindful, quite frankly, to be vigilant, and hopefully to be able to speak out. On campus at Oregon State University, every year we have the Holocaust Memorial Week. One year we had a wonderful speaker who was given a question by a very brave student who said, how can we avoid such sort of human rights abuses in the world moving forward? And the response proffered up to the young student was this: first, try not to be a victim. Second, try not to be an oppressor. And third, try not to remain silent. I hope that this review sparks your interest in reading Caste. I certainly think this is a book for our time, and it is a book that proffers up for all of us the hope that through self-reflection and through individual commitment, we as individuals and collectively can indeed liberate humanity by lifting up our own understandings around the world. Thank you very much. Thank you kindly for the opportunity to share this review with you. At this time, I would like to invite Mike Hansen to join us and assist with facilitating and moderating any audience questions.
Hey, Allison, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting. So now is the time for questions. We have a few questions already. If anyone else has more questions, please feel free to enter them into the question or chat box you may see. And the first question I have, one audience member asks, is there an evolutionary utility of the caste system? Pecking orders seem to be common characteristics of gregarious animals.
So, common characteristic between, pardon me?
Of gregarious animals?
Yes, actually, in the book Caste, Isabel Wilkerson actually talks about some of the organizational structures that animals have to deal with caste. And she gives a comparison of wolves and hyenas, which was really rather interesting. And in her comparison, she talks about how in these two societies, animal societies, that it is the hyenas that actually have a more proactive stance towards quelling this tendency to create an underclass or subordinate caste. And that was very interesting because what it does is it elevates, I think, for humanity, the idea that yes, there are these impulses within living systems and within living creatures, but there is also the overriding impulse for justice and to maintain the homeostasis, if you will, of the pack. And that homeostasis of the pack, and really the survival of the pack, has to be based on some sort of understanding of justice and representation, and making sure that every individual in that pack or society is valued and matters. And so this was actually one of the more interesting, I would say, comments that Isabel Wilkerson brings up in her reading.
Thank you. Another audience member asks, let's see, what about those who value and benefit from our current caste system? Is this book possibly a blueprint for their continued success and domination? After all, well, then they cites the previous election. So.
Actually, that's a very interesting question. I find it interesting that somebody raised this because that actually went through my head as I was reading the book. However, you know, I think it's really important, and this is why reading and why having freedom of speech for all of its challenges is so very important. We need to know what other people are thinking. We need to be able to create a public sphere in which people can interrogate different ideas, know what other people are thinking, and then find counter narratives or counter speech to really think through a thought or idea. Could this possibly be a blueprint? Yeah, I think it possibly could be. However, perhaps reframing this and saying, and is this also a blueprint for us who wish to make a change and need to find, because again, this book leaves you pretty much open-ended to decide for yourself how best we should move forward, which is why I ended with that last slide, Quo Vadis, America? Where are we going? Because at the end of the day, this is going to be our collective move as a nation. And are we going to adhere to our values of all lives do indeed matter? Some lives have been disproportionately impacted throughout history, and we need to address that. But e pluribus unum, are we really committed to the ideals of a pluralistic democracy? So I think that the book does serve as a blueprint for those of us who wish to see America live up to the amazing and wonderful and very unique ideals that this country has put forth.
So another audience member asks, says it's a human way of defining our very busy world by compartmentalizing things. Example, our eyes see much more than we process. If it's inherent in human biology, how do we change that without getting flooded? I find that even individuals often need to find an other. How can we change that?
Right. Isabel Wilkerson talks about, again, this impulse that we have to scapegoat. I think I mentioned her specific quote around that people need to have a scapegoat because that's sort of their release valve for when things go wrong or bad or when there's some sort of challenge. Human history has taught us that we do tend to do that seems to be a societal impulse. However, we have free will and we have enlightened intelligence. We should be able to A, recognize that this is a pattern, and B, be able to interrupt it. And I think that now more than ever, we need to do more of the latter. We need to do more of the interrupting Now, in order to interrupt means you have to educate yourself. You have to know what exactly it is that you're interrupting. And you need to define a strategy to do that. And the strategy will vary depending upon the context. And as far as how human beings continually categorize other people, it is obvious that these categorizations are man-made, they are socially constructed, and they are fluid. They don't necessarily, and I say this with caution, they don't necessarily change. I think you heard in the presentation and in the book, Isabel Wilkerson talks about how the category of whiteness changed. However, the category of those who were considered non-white did not change. So it's very interesting. And then there's these hierarchies even within the category of whiteness. So I think that what it takes for us is to interrogate what it means when we create categories, spoken or unspoken, and what are the implications of those categories. And we need to be able to interrogate why we're doing that and figure out what are the disproportionate impacts around this. And this is where the conversation shifts towards understanding, towards equity, towards empathy, and above all, and most importantly, towards justice.
Great, thank you. I have a comment here, a brief comment. Thanks so much, Allison. You've done a great job reviewing a deep and profound book.
Thank you.
There's another comment here. It was an excellent book and an excellent review. However, is there anything about the book that you found problematic, poorly written, or are critical of?
That's a very fair question. I found, so as I said, the book is not an easy read. And I say that because the book will trigger, I am sure, some emotional reactions by some of the examples that Isabel Wilkerson sets forth. I myself teach at Oregon State University. I teach history. I deal with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And many of these examples I already sort of knew, but I will say it is still difficult, even after knowing all of these, to read them again. And she does not mince her words or equivocate in any way about those examples. And quite frankly, those examples are important. It is important to remind us that this wasn't long ago, that the vestiges of many of these circumstances are with us today, that we use different language today to describe things that in effect are still with us. And we need to be able to confront that. And Isabel Wilkerson does do a good job of trying to confront that. I think one of the criticisms, and I have read this from other reviewers, was that although she uses the Dalits as sort of a primary example, or actually the impetus of the book was from her trip to India and being introduced to the Dalit, I guess you could say, social justice and civil rights movement in India. One of the reviews that I read, which was from someone who was a Dalit, said they would have liked to have seen more of that in this particular book. And in my reading of it, I would have to agree. I came away from the book a little more curious about a stronger connection with that. I will say this, though, even though I came away wanting a stronger connection to the Dalit experience, it also encouraged me as a lifelong learner to already start identifying some readings so that I can learn more, because there were just some real gems of wisdom in Caste that I was unaware of. And I thought, wow, I really should have known this. I had no idea this was what was really going on in India. I knew about the movements, I knew about some of the theoretical frameworks that came out of the Dalit movements, but I never really did a deep dive into what was going on with some of the more contemporary Dalit movements. So I have to credit Isabel Wilkerson for inspiring me to want to learn and read more. The book is definitely a book that you will need to spend time with. You will probably read chapters and need to put it down and really let it sit and sink in. but it is definitely a book worth reading, and certainly one worth reading at this time in this country, given the level of discourse and political polarization and racial polarization that we have. It is definitely a book worth reading.
Thank you. Here's another question from a audience member. They say, I read the book. Thanks for reviewing. I recommend the book Humankind by Rutger Bregman. This gives us hope. Would you agree that children are not born with prejudice, but taught to degrade others?
Yes, sadly, I do agree with that. Sadly and hopefully, I mean, I agree that it's sad that prejudices are indeed enforced and taught to children. However, the hope in all of this is that children do come here with an openness to the world. Children are enthusiastic to see difference, to learn about difference, and this is where we should get our inspiration, is from the innocence of children. And this is where our role as educators, as parents, as aunties, uncles, relatives, family members, community members, as a nation should be investing in the amazing potential of all of our children. This country has such a wealth of experience, lived experience, talent, and diversity that is our greatest strength. And inculcating that in our children so that they see their potential and the potential of all the other peers they have around them, this is what will lift us up. And so I'm a firm believer in that. And as a grandmother, I certainly feel that way.
Great, thank you. Let's see. The question, I agree that it would be enormously productive to undertake a truth and reconciliation process, and that we should pursue reparations. We recently witnessed an attempt to demonize critical race theory and use that to coordinate resistance to understanding racial history and systemic racism in America. Shows that a large segment of America would never entertain a truth and reconciliation process in this country, when it won't even allow appreciating truth in our history. Your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. You know, I really think that truth in history is critical and important. And the more I teach and the older I get and the more I interact with different people, the more I realize how absolutely paltry our education system is on a number of levels. Number one, history. That we really need a different view of history, and one that really shows the history of this country for what it is. And quite frankly, the history of this country for what it is a truly multicultural history. And it is a very complex history, and I don't think we want to deal with or confront the complexities. And by complexities, I'm not saying everything was bad, so I want to make that really clear. I'm talking about the kinds of human relationships that were created over time, some under duress, some really not good, and then there were others that really were seeking justice and really were seeking synergy and really working towards that idea of a pluralistic democracy. And they were wrestling with big questions. We need a history that points us to what those big questions were that they were wrestling with, how they wrestled with them, where they landed, and where they failed, okay, where they came up short. I mentioned Reconstruction was a failed policy. This is a good example of intent versus impact, okay? The intent was more than likely, you know, in a direction to help. However, the impact, the implementation fell flat. Some people might argue that that might be somewhat similar to what happened in Afghanistan, you know, which is a recent contemporaneous issue. That said, I think history is critical, and I agree with the audience member who shared that we need to have a true history of this country. Number two, I think another area that we have failed in our education is around civics and civic engagement. What does it mean to be an active citizen or an active participant in this country, whether you're a citizen or not? I'm married to someone who is not a citizen yet. This individual is getting their green card. This individual is from the former East Germany and grew up under authoritarianism, and his parents grew up under the Nazi regime. And we have some very interesting conversations at night about the state of the US, what we see, how it compares to world history, which is why Isabel Wilkerson's book is really good, because she can make these connections, and where there's warning shots being fired and people need to pay attention so that we don't go down some similar paths. So history, civics, civic engagement, and learning how to talk to each other, being able to have dialogues around difficult conversations, difficult topics such as caste. Caste is one of the areas we simply avoid in this country. And then when we do talk about it, we explode on each other. We are unable to talk across lines of difference. And in order for this democracy to truly work and to truly grow, and for everyone in this country to truly flourish, we have to be able to develop the skill set to confront these issues, which means talking to each other and actually listening. Truth and reconciliation can only happen with deep listening, a willingness to engage those issues.
Thank you. Looks like maybe we have time for one more question, if that's okay. So this audience member says, Germany has put in place educational programs and restrictions on Nazi symbols to proactively prevent a recurrence of Nazism. We've never done anything similar. We permit children to grow up marinating in white privilege and white supremacy, some more or less depending on locale. I believe the US can't change without better education. Please comment.
100% agree with the audience members' comments. 100% agree. The United States has not done a very good job around symbology, which was one of the slides that I shared and certainly is called out in Isabel Wilkerson's book. And that is why this book is such a good read, because it's asking that question, like, why aren't we? Germany has indeed done a very good job in raising that up. But here's a warning shot to everyone on this call. Germany has done a fantastic job in trying to re-educate, if you will, its public on the issues of the Third Reich. But there is now a new movement, and this is a global movement, and this is why this book is so important. Because of the World Wide Web, because of the internet, because of social media, people are now sharing ideas, thoughts, memes around caste all over the world. And the hard work Germany has done around the Third Reich is beginning to be challenged by some far-right extremists in Europe who communicate with far-right extremists in the United States. And if you follow, many of the talking points are very similar. This is a warning shot. This is something we should be vigilant about. This is what you need to pay attention to. This means not only looking at the politics in the United States, but also looking at the politics in Europe and, quite frankly, the rest of the world. We, as the human species, this is our responsibility. The old biblical question, am I my brother's keeper? That is one of the biggest existential questions ever asked, and it is one that is still relevant today.
Great. Thank you so very much for your review and for answering the many questions you had sent your way. That is about the time we have for today. So I welcome Deborah and everyone else back on to the screen.
I'd like to thank Dr. Davis Whitehighs for her review and her wonderful insights through all the questions that we had at the end. Thank you very much. And thank you, audience members, for joining us. We hope you join us again for another review, and we will see you next time, I hope. We'd all like to say goodbye. Bye-bye.